Um, busy week here ahead of us, and obviously jumping back into Big Ten play after our APY game. Have a really challenging week with obviously Minnesota up here first. They're a team that's won at Michigan. We're shorthanded and beat a good Rutgers team. They've had some great wins throughout the season. Won at Mississippi State. Just really impressed. They've had some really key transfers that have really helped them. The Battle kid has been phenomenal. Willis, who was with them at one time, was just phenomenal in their last home game. But they've had the addition of some, they're an old team. I feel like I've said that a lot this year about a lot of teams, but they're an old team, well coached. They scheme. Really scheme for you defensively. Curry has really helped them. Curry's been with the program for 6 years now. He's one of those guys that was really good early in his career and battled some injuries, he's out with an ankle injury, but it's a really good team. They almost won at Michigan State, had a chance to win it basically in the last minute. As I mentioned, they've had some really good road wins. As well as a good win coming off of Saturday. So big time challenge. Obviously, myself and unfortunately our teams, we've struggled at the barn. So we've played teams that have been ready to play. We've had highly ranked teams. I think we were number 2 in the country at one time when we struggled there. Bottom line is we got to expect a great environment, a really good team, and need to be ready to play.
Chris, do you know how much of your roster is going to be making the trip? How do you guys come out of the week?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. So Michi Johnson and Jamari Wheeler are both day-to-day. Jamari's had an ankle, a foot injury that has bothered him. Has been unable to practice. So those guys are both day-to-day and will be game time decisions. Justice is out and Seth is out.
You mentioned having issues playing there in the past and how some of those games have gone. It's a chance for a milestone for you, milestone for EJ. I don't know how much that stuff ever pops on your radar, but in addition to having a chance to just play another game and kind of get back in the swing of things, there's also kind of some emotional heft maybe to this game. Do you feel any of that, and what does that mean to you that both you and EJ could have milestones in the same game?
Yeah, no, I love the contribution that EJ, has made to our program. He's just, I've said it over and over. He's a phenomenal kid from a phenomenal family. He just made an incredible mark. His legacy is going to be one that's significant because of who he is as a player and who he is as a kid. But he's got to continue to grow as a player, and as really good and talented as he is, tomorrow night's going to be a challenge for him, and he's got to be ready to lead his team, and that's I think his only focus right now is leading his team as well as he can lead his team along with Kyle and Justice and Jamari. So when those milestones come for a guy like EJ, we're going to appreciate him for who he is, but right now I think he's focused on the task at hand.
Chris, I know you got to be frustrated with the pauses, and half the guys you just mentioned right there seem to be on the injury report. With Jamari, you throw into the mix. What does that do for you? I mean, I know you trust a guy like Jimmy Soto, so he's going to get some run. What else do you do? Where do you look for contributions?
Yeah, I tell you, it has been, and I know it's been frustrating for Seth and Justice, because I know they expected, particularly in Justice's case, so much for this kind of season after the complete season he had last year. But I think you really try to focus on who you do have and the strengths of those guys, the abilities of those guys, and not let the other stuff kind of mess with your head a little bit. And that's what we tried to do. we've not been able to have a consistent group practicing here in the last week. But I think we're getting to that point. I don't think this is going to be a long-term thing with Jamari. We're going to do our best not to. He's a tough kid, not to let this thing be a long-term thing. But it does. It makes you focus on, okay, what do we have? What can we count on us having? And how do we develop a game plan and a rotation around that?
Would you say that this year is even weirder than last?
Well, I don't know. Last year was pretty strange, given just the daily testing and the playing without fans. I think this year's a little more normal. I would say, Timmy, that I just think this year in some ways has been maybe equally or maybe a little more challenging due to you add the COVID element to the injuries that you're kind of normally going to have some type of injuries on your team. Every team does, but now you add the COVID element to it and the inconsistency in terms of being able to have practice numbers. I think that has made it a challenge. And the two pauses that we've had after a couple wins, too, that kind of makes it frustrating. You're just starting to build a little bit of momentum, but fortunately the day here, the layoff here is different in that the layoff before, we had a lot of guys who just couldn't practice for 10 to 12 days. And while we've had some guys not be able to practice, it's not been near as significant.
Coach, you mentioned a battle for Minnesota. I'm just wondering, because he's a guy obviously that transferred in from George Washington, and maybe you'd expect, a little bit of a drop off in production, coming to the Big Ten. I mean, you've talked about that with guys,
Yeah.
But he's putting up 20 points against Big Ten teams and whatnot.
Yeah.
What's made his transition maybe easier than some other guys in terms of his game?
Well, a couple things. I think one is the level he came at. The Atlantic 10, the A10 is a really good league. So I think you're always looking at that and saying, okay, that's a pretty good league. Whether you call it maybe it's not a Power 5 league, but in basketball, it's just right. It's right there. A lot of really good teams. So I think that factors in, number one, to making his transition a little bit easier. I think guys that have he has good positional size and versatility, but he can really score the ball. I think he was able to be really productive at a really high level of play, and then I think that's allowed him to transition here well. And again, they've needed him too. He's had to play a major role on their good season.
And it's not like you guys don't do this obviously for non-conference games and everything like that, but is there an added challenge in preparing and scouting for a team that has so many contributors or guys that are first-year players for them because they've transferred
Yes.
in from other places?
Yes, it's an added challenge. It really is. And you see that more and more in college basketball, but the teams that you can say, hey, we know what this kid can do because we've seen him grow through his 3 years, but you kind of know what he's capable of. Here you're going into situations where you have really good players who you're seeing for the first time. It does change scouting for sure.
Just a little bit more, EJ. Obviously, things happen. People make different decisions throughout their career, but that class, that was your second recruiting class here, and it was a pretty highly rated class. The guys are going on to do whatever they're going on to do. But with EJ, he's been the constant thing here.
Yeah.
One, from the day you started recruiting him to now, has that plan going exactly the way you thought it would go?
Well, it's gone, I don't think you ever anticipate a kid as a sophomore being necessarily, we knew he was really gifted and talented and would have a major impact in our program. We knew the kind of person he was in recruiting him, which is so important, maturity levels, the kind of person. So we felt pretty optimistic about him, just because we knew the character and the person that this kid was, along with his talent, combine that with his talent. So, but I don't know if you ever scripted. He's had a pretty daggone good run here, and it's hard to ever project kind of the success he's had. You don't want to put that on a kid, but it's been pretty optimal. And I know for him, I know he would like to finish both performing well individually, but most important to him is our team continuing to have success and have greater success.
So from his freshman year where he's playing a role where he's not the
Yeah.
guy scoring, and that was difficult for him at times, he's even admitted that, to
Yeah.
what he is now. And I know it's not over, but how would you maybe kind of summarize what EJ's career here has been?
It's been phenomenal. It's been, I think he's had a phenomenal, again, there's so much of our season left to be played, and he's gonna be faced with a lot of challenges. But it's just, I think he's had a phenomenal career here that I think he hopes continues to grow. I mean, I've just loved every day coaching him, and we've coached him, we've pushed him, because we want him to experience everything that he wants in his life, and that his family wants in his life, and for that to happen, he's got to continue to grow as a player.
Kind of on top of what Stephen was saying, I mean, how much of his, and I know you don't want to talk about legacy with EJ because his run's not done yet, but I mean, he said before the season that he kind of wanted to be one of the guys at Ohio State, so like known. Have you seen that? Like, was that a pressure on him? Was that a load that he took?
Oh, I think it is. I think he still carries it. I think he still feels it. We talked about that before the season. He knows the expectations that come with being the best player. That's not easy for a 20-year-old kid, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid. Like that's a lot. It's a lot. So, he and his mom and I and his family, we've talked about best way to manage that. And he'll need to continue to have practices in place to manage that the right way. You got a lot on your shoulders there. He just needs to be EJ. He's not a perfect player. He's got the things he's got to continue to grow in. But yeah, that's a lot. But to your question, EJ's the kind of kid that leaving a legacy has meant something to him. And I think it means something to Kyle Young. It means something to other guys too. I'm not saying he's the only one, but it really means something to him. And he's one of those guys that you can reflect back on and say, okay, Ohio State gave a lot to him, but he gave a lot to this place.
And how much of that legacy that we talk about is stuff that maybe fans or we don't see, whether it's the relationship between him and you, him and the coaching staff, him and his players? Like, how important is that to kind of how he will be remembered?
Yeah, no, who he is as a person, and how our fan base is, I think he's beloved, as I've said, he's beloved. So I think he's a very endearing, likable person. He just really is, not just a smile, but just who he is. And I think you can see that in through social media. You can see that in how guys play. He's very easy to like. But again, his story's still being written, and I don't want to make too much of, we're not sitting here, going into senior day here. So he's still got a lot of stuff left.
Chris, you guys had 22 days off, I think, in December, between games. Not quite as long of a layoff here, but now that you look back on it, how important was that IUPUI game to get in, now that you have?
Yeah.
I think it's 9 days between games now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more important than I thought at the time, to be honest with you. I thought it was important just to continue to play and get games in, but certainly more important than I thought at the time, even just to get some game repetitions from some of our primary guys, but also some of our guys that are on the bench. So yeah, it was important for us.
To now have, I think, like I said, 9 days between games, and do you kind of go into this not really knowing how you guys are going to respond, because it's not a 22-day layoff, but it's also not a 3 or 4 day window like you normally have. Is there a little bit of a balance there?
I don't have as many concerns, but you still do have concerns about just generally how sharp you're going to be. But I don't have as many concerns as I did given that longer layoff, and then also guys that had not played or practiced. We had some guys going into that Nebraska game, and Nebraska's a team that more than capable. We've seen that against us in Illinois. They beat a lot of teams in this league, so give them I think they deserve respect for sure, given I think they're gonna have a really good finish here, but just in general, we had guys that had only practiced like a couple times leading up to that.
Coach, Dwayne the other night, he had 7 threes,
Yeah.
broke a Indiana Pacers franchise record. To kind of see the journey that he had to take to get to where he is and the role he has with the Pacers now, just how's it felt to kind of see him break out like that?
Oh man, Dwayne's a great lesson for young players, you know, because older players, you kind of get it a little bit, but he's a great lesson for young players. I mean, you're talking about a kid who, you know, was a good, you know, we were glad when we recruited him. We thought he had a very bright future. We thought he had a very bright future as a player. I think we maybe saw some things in him maybe other people didn't see, but we also knew he was going to require a tremendous amount of daily coaching. And I give guys like, you know, Ryan Peden and Jake Diebler and Terry at the time and now Tony, but Jake really's worked with him a lot individually last year. I give Jake a lot of credit for his continued growth, but he's a great example of a young man who it didn't come right away for him. It didn't come as soon as he wanted, and he stayed patient, and he stuck with just the idea of, hey, I'm going, you know, call it the process if you want, the idea of getting better every day and accepting coaching and not looking for an escape route. He did that, and you know, we're his biggest fans. I mean, you should see our text chains as coaches. Our group text that night, you know, we're all texting back. I was sending clips that I saw from his threes that night. So we're really happy for him. We're proud of him, and we want to see him continue to grow. I told their guy who hit me up on Twitter yesterday, their director of scouting, I told him, you know, tell him to keep grinding. Just keep grinding. He's got a lot ahead of him.
It seems like guys that have professionalized since you've been here with Dwayne and with Jay Sean, they've kind of had to take that different journey that some guys maybe not have to take, whether you have to go through the G League or you have to go through Europe to get to the NBA level. Is that kind of something you preach? You kind of preach this patience of kind of trusting yourself in this organization?
No, I think you'll see, I think throughout our time here, you'll see various examples. I mean, you saw Kada get drafted. You'll see other guys get drafted. You know, what we really want them, it's not about getting there. It's about staying there and finding a team that values you and getting a second contract. Those are the things that we really want. We want our guys prepared for that. I could rattle off 100 examples of guys that got drafted and aren't in the league 2 years later. You know, so we want guys to be able to have productive careers there.
But just in general, and like you said, not to get too much on like an EJ legacy type of thing, but I'm very struck by how important he has been to your success here and the number of wins that you guys have together. And obviously you're right on the cusp of 100 wins. When you're recruiting players, like when you're going through a coaching career, how often do you get guys like that where you really feel like your success and their success are really kind of bound together? Is that a common thing? Have you had, I mean, you just mentioned some really good guys that have played here, but is that a common thing in your profession to come across guys like that really mean that much to your success?
Yeah, I mean, I think any coach will tell you, Adam, that their success is directly tied to their ability to recruit good players and players who also embrace, you know, what that coach and coaching staff preaches. I think that's so important, right? It's not just good players, but it's players that embrace and communicate that to the other players what's important to the coaching staff, our program's culture. And EJ's that. He embodies our program's culture. He really does. So I think that's what was really critical. We were able to recruit a really talented player who embraced our culture and could grow as our program grew, you know, because he was one of our first and earliest recruits. And you know, I think you know, obviously makes us very grateful, but we just listen, you know, our focus is on playing as well as we can tomorrow night. So I don't want to spend too much time on legacy.
I was wondering real quick, you mentioned recruiting there at the beginning, if you could look to the future. It's likely going to be a transitional year, you know, with you haven't even minced words about how EJ's just put a bow on him, he's gonna be
Yeah.
gone. It's really exciting what you guys have seemed to have done recruiting here. A
Yeah.
lot of people are talking about it.
It's a really exciting class. And I think we're gonna have some really also talented players that are gonna grow into new roles next year that are with us right now. So you combine that with, adding, a couple, transfer or two with the young talent that we think can continue to grow and flourish, and the young talent coming in. And I'm just really excited about that class, the kind of people they are, the diversity of skill sets that they bring, and their upside as a group. It's a phenomenal group, it really is. And again, our staff deserves a lot of credit because a lot of work went into that. But, there's some thoughts of, okay, oh no, we're losing, these number of productive guys, and that will be sad in its own right, but it's also very exciting about what's on the cusp here for us here, both with our young guys growing into new roles, as well as the incoming talent. It really is.